The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training ground at Fort Henderson, casting long shadows across the dusty parade field. Private Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her pack straps for the third time in 10 minutes. Around her, 47 other recruits shuffled nervously in formation, their brand-new combat boots still squeaking with each movement. Drill Sergeant Marcus Kellerman stood at the front of the formation like a monument to military tradition. His uniform was pressed to razor-sharp creases, his posture rigid as steel, and his eyes held the kind of cold authority that made grown men shrink back. At 6'4" and built like a linebacker, Kellerman commanded respect through sheer physical presence alone. His voice, when he spoke, could carry across 3 football fields without effort. "Listen up, maggots," Kellerman's voice boomed across the formation. "Today marks the beginning of your transformation from worthless civilians into soldiers. Some of you think you're tough. Some of you think you know what military discipline means. Let me tell you something, you don't know squat." Maria kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, maintaining the position of attention she had practiced countless times in the mirror of her barracks room. At 22 years old, she stood 5'6" with the lean build of someone who had spent years working construction with her father back home in Phoenix. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, and her olive skin already showed the first signs of the desert tan that would mark her as a veteran of this place. She had enlisted 6 months after graduating from Arizona State University with a degree in engineering. While her classmates headed to corporate jobs or graduate school, Maria felt called to serve her country. Her grandfather had been a Marine in Korea, and her uncle served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Military service ran in her family like a thread connecting generations. "Private Santos," Kellerman's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Step forward." Maria's heart jumped, but she maintained her composure as she took 3 measured steps forward from the formation. "Yes, drill sergeant." Kellerman circled her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Tell me, Santos, what makes you think you belong here?" "I enlisted to serve my country, drill sergeant." "Wrong answer," Kellerman snapped. "You enlisted because you couldn't cut it in the real world. College graduate, right? Probably thought the army would be easy compared to your little engineering classes. News flash, princess, this isn't some classroom where you can charm your way to good grades." The other recruits remained motionless, but Maria could feel their attention focused on this exchange. She knew this was a test, though she couldn't yet understand all the rules of the game being played. "I'm here to learn, drill sergeant." "Oh, you'll learn all right." Kellerman stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You'll learn that the Army doesn't need more diversity poster children. You'll learn that real soldiers earn their place through blood and sweat, not affirmative action quotas." The words hit Maria like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain still. Her grandfather had warned her about drill sergeants, told her they would try to break her down to build her back up. What he hadn't prepared her for was the personal nature of the attacks, the way Kellerman seemed to see her presence as a personal insult. "Front-leaning rest position," Kellerman commanded. "All of you." The entire formation dropped to push-up position in unison. Maria's arms locked into place, her body forming a straight line from head to heels. The gravel bit into her palms through her gloves, and the Arizona sun hammered down on her back. "Santos thinks she's special," Kellerman announced to the group. "College education probably thinks she's smarter than the rest of you knuckle-draggers. Let's see how smart she is when her arms give out." Minutes ticked by in the push-up position. Maria's shoulders began to burn, then her arms started shaking with the effort of holding her body weight. Around her, other recruits began to struggle, their breathing becoming labored as sweat dripped onto the ground beneath them. "Santos, since you're so educated, why don't you explain to everyone the proper technique for the front-leaning rest position?" Maria's voice came out steady despite the fire in her muscles. "The body should form a straight line from head to heels, drill sergeant. Arms fully extended, palms flat on the ground shoulder-width apart. Core engaged to prevent sagging." "Very good," Kellerman said mockingly. "Now drop and give me 20 perfect push-ups. Everyone else recover." The rest of the formation stood up, grateful for the relief. Maria remained in position and began her push-ups, counting out loud as required. Her form remained textbook perfect despite her fatigued muscles. "Faster, Santos. My grandmother could do push-ups faster than that." Maria increased her pace, her breathing becoming more controlled as she found her rhythm. Construction work had built real strength in her arms and back, strength that served her well now. 15-16, 17-18, 19-20, drill sergeant. Recover, Kellerman ordered. Maria snapped to attention, barely breathing hard. A flicker of something surprise, maybe respect, crossed Kellerman's face before his expression hardened again. Today we begin combat training, Kellerman announced to the group. Real soldiers need to know how to fight with more than just weapons. Sometimes you'll need to use your hands, your feet, your entire body to survive. Some of you have been in fights before. Most of you have probably never thrown a real punch in your lives. He gestured toward a series of training mats arranged on the field. We'll start with basic techniques, then move to practical application. Partner up with someone roughly your size and weight. The formation broke up as recruits began pairing off. Maria found herself standing with Private Johnson, a lanky kid from Minnesota who looked like he'd never seen the inside of a gym. Before they could begin practicing the demonstrated techniques, Kellerman appeared beside them. Santos, you're with me. Every conversation on the field stopped. 47 sets of eyes turned toward them as Kellerman led Maria to the center mat. This wasn't standard procedure, and everyone knew it. Since Santos here thinks she's tough enough to be a soldier, let's see how she handles herself against real opposition. Kellerman stripped off his drill sergeant hat and handed it to another instructor. Don't worry, Santos. I'll go easy on you. Maria felt her stomach drop, but she stepped onto the mat. She had wrestled in high school and learned basic self-defense in college, but Kellerman outweighed her by at least 60 pounds and had years of military combat training. The scenario is simple, Kellerman announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Enemy combatant has you cornered, your weapon is out of reach, you need to neutralize the threat and escape. Begin when ready. Maria dropped into a defensive stance, her feet shoulder-width apart, hands raised but not clenched into fists. Kellerman approached slowly, almost casually, like a predator toying with prey. His first move was a simple grab for her wrist. Maria slipped to the side, using his momentum to throw him off balance. Kellerman recovered quickly, spinning to face her with grudging approval in his eyes. Not bad, he admitted, again. This time he came at her more seriously, using his reach advantage to try to grapple her into submission. Maria ducked under his arms and swept his ankle, but Kellerman was too experienced to fall. He twisted away from her sweep and countered with a move that sent her stumbling backward. The watching recruits remained silent, tension thick in the desert air. Maria could feel their anxiety, their uncertainty about what they were witnessing. This felt more personal than training, more vindictive than instruction. Kellerman pressed his advantage, using his size to crowd her toward the edge of the mat. Maria realized she was being cornered, exactly as he had described in the scenario. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the only way out is through. When Kellerman lunged forward to pin her arms, Maria dropped low and drove her shoulder into his solar plexus. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent him staggering backward. Before he could recover, she swept his legs and sent him crashing to the mat. The training ground fell into absolute silence. Kellerman lay on his back, staring up at the blazing Arizona sky, the wind knocked completely out of him. Maria stood over him, breathing hard but steady on her feet. "Drill Sergeant, are you all right?" she asked, extending her hand to help him up. Kellerman stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Something dark flickered across his features before he slapped her hand away and rolled to his feet without assistance. "Lucky shot," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Real combat isn't a wrestling match, Santos. Real combat is about breaking your opponent before they break you." He retrieved his drill sergeant hat and placed it firmly on his head. "Everyone pair up and practice what you just observed. Santos, you're with Johnson as originally assigned." As the other recruits began their training exercises, Maria caught glimpses of their expressions. Some looked impressed, others worried. A few seemed afraid, not of combat training, but of what they had witnessed in Kellerman's behavior toward her. Private Chen, a quiet computer programmer from California, worked near enough to whisper during a break between exercises. "That wasn't normal training. He's got it out for you." Maria nodded slightly but said nothing. She had reached the same conclusion, but acknowledging it out loud felt dangerous. The rest of the training session passed without incident. Kellerman maintained professional distance, barking orders and corrections at the group as a whole rather than singling out individuals. But Maria felt his attention on her like a weight, a constant pressure that never fully lifted. When the session finally ended, the recruits were dismissed for chow. Maria fell into step with the others, eager to put distance between herself and the training ground. The mess hall offered the promise of air conditioning and normalcy, a break from the intensity of Kellerman's scrutiny. Santos, Kellerman's voice called out just as she reached the edge of the field. A word. The other recruits continued toward the mess hall, but Maria could feel them slowing, straining to hear what would happen next. She turned and walked back toward Kellerman, her boots crunching loudly on the gravel in the sudden quiet. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you?" Kellerman asked when she was close enough for private conversation. "College degree, good at sports, probably had everything handed to you your whole life." "No, drill sergeant." "I know your type, Santos. You're here to prove some kind of point. Show the world that little girls can play soldier just as well as the men. Problem is, this isn't a game. This isn't some feel-good movie where the underdog wins because she believes in herself." Maria remained at attention, staring straight ahead. "I'm here to serve my country, drill sergeant." "You're here because the Army needs to fill quotas. Diversity statistics that look good on congressional reports. But when the shooting starts, those quotas won't keep your squad alive. Your teammates won't care about your degree or your feelings when they need someone they can count on." The words stung because they echoed doubts Maria had carried since the day she enlisted. Questions about whether she was truly qualified or simply fulfilling demographic requirements had haunted her through processing and the early days of basic training. "I understand your concerns, drill sergeant." "Do you?" Kellerman stepped closer. "Because I don't think you understand anything. You got lucky today on the mats, caught me off guard with a move I wasn't expecting. But luck runs out, Santos, and when it does, people die." He paused, studying her face for any sign of weakness or doubt. "I've been training soldiers for 15 years. I've seen tough guys wash out in the first week and quiet kids become war heroes. But I've never seen someone who needed to prove herself as badly as you do." "I'll prove myself through my performance, drill sergeant." "Yes, you will, and I'll be watching every step of the way. Every mistake, every moment of weakness, every sign that you don't belong here. Because the soldiers who serve under the officers you might become someday deserve better than someone who's here to make a statement." Kellerman turned and walked away without dismissing her, leaving Maria standing alone on the empty training ground. The sun continued its relentless assault from above, and the distant sounds of the mess hall seemed impossibly far away. She remained at attention for several more seconds before finally allowing herself to relax. The conversation had revealed more about Kellerman's mindset than any formal evaluation could have. He saw her presence as a challenge to everything he believed about military service and combat effectiveness. Walking toward the mess hall, Maria reflected on her grandfather's stories about military service. He had told her about sergeants who broke down recruits to build them back stronger, but he had also warned her about the ones who simply enjoyed the breaking. The difference, he explained, was in their motivation. Good sergeants wanted to create better soldiers. Bad ones wanted to prove their own superiority. The mess hall buzzed with conversation when she arrived, but it quieted noticeably as she entered. Word had clearly spread about the incident on the training mats. Maria collected her meal and found a seat at a table with Johnson and a few other recruits from her squad. "That was intense out there," Johnson said quietly. "I've never seen a drill sergeant do one-on-one combat training like that." "It wasn't combat training," said Private Williams, a former security guard from Detroit. "That was personal. Kellerman was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone." "Well, it backfired," added Private Chen. "She dropped him like a bad habit." Maria ate her meal in silence, letting the conversation flow around her. She appreciated their support, but she also understood that their association with her might make them targets as well. Kellerman struck her as the type of leader who held grudges and spread blame beyond the primary object of his attention. After dinner, the recruits returned to their barracks for equipment maintenance and personal time. Maria sat on her bunk, carefully cleaning her rifle according to the procedures they had learned. The repetitive motions helped calm her mind and organize her thoughts about the day's events. Private Rodriguez, who occupied the bunk next to hers, worked quietly on his own weapon for several minutes before speaking. My older brother went through basic training here 5 years ago. He told me stories about Kellerman. Maria looked up from her rifle. What kind of stories? Nothing specific, just that Kellerman had a reputation for being especially hard on certain recruits. Women, minorities, anyone he thought didn't fit his idea of what a soldier should look like. Most of them washed out. But not all. No, not all. The ones who stuck it out usually came out stronger, but they had to endure hell to get there. Rodriguez returned his attention to his weapon cleaning. My brother said the key was to never give Kellerman a real reason to kick you out. Stay within regulations, perform better than required, and never lose your temper no matter what he does or says. The advice echoed Maria's own instincts, but it also highlighted the unfairness of her situation. While other recruits could focus entirely on meeting training standards and learning military skills, she would have to navigate a personal conflict with her primary instructor. That night, as the barracks settled into quiet, Maria lay awake thinking about her grandfather's words from their last conversation before she left for basic training. He had been in his 80s then, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his mind still sharp as a blade. The military will test you in ways you can't imagine, he had told her. Not just your physical strength or your courage under fire. It'll test your character, your determination, your ability to hold on to who you are when everyone around you is trying to change you into something else. At the time, Maria had assumed he was talking about the general challenges of military service. Now she understood he had been preparing her for something more specific, more personal. He had served in an era when the military was even less welcoming to people who didn't fit traditional molds, and he recognized the signs of what she would face. The next morning brought the same brutal Arizona sun and the same formation on the training ground. Kellerman appeared as punctual and perfectly pressed as always, his authority radiating across the field like heat waves. Today we focus on tactical movement, he announced. Real combat requires soldiers who can move quickly and quietly through hostile territory. We'll be practicing infiltration techniques, camouflage, and silent communication. The training began with basic movement patterns across open ground. Recruits learned to use available cover, to move in teams while maintaining visual contact, and to communicate through hand signals rather than verbal commands. Maria threw herself into the exercises with complete focus. Every movement was calculated, every decision measured against the standards Kellerman had established. She helped teammates who struggled with the concepts, demonstrated techniques when asked, and consistently performed at the top of the group. For most of the morning, Kellerman maintained professional distance from her. He corrected her form occasionally, the same as he did with other recruits, but without the personal edge that had characterized their previous interactions. The change made Maria more nervous than his open hostility had. She sensed he was planning something, waiting for the right moment to escalate their conflict beyond what had happened on the combat mats. The opportunity came during the final exercise of the day. Kellerman divided the recruits into 2 teams for a practical application of the infiltration techniques they had learned. One team would attempt to move across a designated area without being detected, while the other team served as sentries trying to spot them. Santos, Kellerman called out as he assigned team positions. Your team leader for the infiltration group. Leadership positions in training exercises were typically rotated among recruits to give everyone experience. Being selected as team leader was normally considered an honor, a sign of trust from the instructors. But Maria recognized this assignment as another test, another opportunity for Kellerman to demonstrate her inadequacy. She gathered her team, Johnson, Chen, Williams, Rodriguez, and 3 other recruits, and began planning their approach to the objective. The mission required crossing 200 yards of open ground, navigating around several observation posts, and reaching a designated building without being spotted by the sentry team. We'll move in 2 groups, Maria explained quietly. Johnson, Chen, and Williams will create a distraction on the eastern approach, while the rest of us move through the western corridor. Once we're past the first checkpoint, we'll regroup and move together to the objective. The plan was solid, taking advantage of the terrain features they had studied and the behavioral patterns they had observed in the sentry team during their preparation time. Maria felt confident in the approach, but she also knew that Kellerman would be watching for any mistake she made as leader. The exercise began with her team in a concealed position at the southern edge of the training area. Maria used hand signals to coordinate the initial movement, sending her distraction group toward their designated position while she led the main element toward the western approach route. Everything went smoothly for the first 50 yards. Her team moved like shadows, using the natural depressions and scattered vegetation to remain invisible to the watching sentries. The distraction group performed flawlessly, drawing attention away from the main infiltration route without being so obvious as to alert the sentries to the deception. Then Kellerman appeared at the observation post directly in their path. He wasn't supposed to be there. The exercise parameters had specified which instructors would serve as sentries, and Kellerman hadn't been among them. His presence changed the entire dynamic of the exercise, introducing an unpredictable element that threatened to derail their carefully planned approach. Maria made a split-second decision to alter their route, leading her team further west to avoid Kellerman's position. The change added distance and time to their movement, but it kept them concealed from his vantage point. They reached the regrouping point successfully and began the final approach to the objective. Maria felt a surge of satisfaction as they moved through the last phase of the infiltration. Her team had adapted to unexpected circumstances and maintained mission focus despite the complications. 10 yards from the objective, Kellerman's voice boomed across the training area. Exercise terminated. Santos' team is compromised. Maria froze, her team stopping behind her as the exercise came to an abrupt halt. They were clearly within the success parameters they had been given, well concealed and undetected by any of the designated sentries. All teams report to the assembly area, Kellerman commanded. As the recruits gathered in formation, Maria felt the familiar weight of attention focused on her. The other team leaders looked confused, clearly uncertain about why the exercise had ended when her team appeared to be succeeding. Santos, Kellerman called out, explain your team's failure. I'm not aware of any failure, Drill Sergeant. We successfully infiltrated to within 10 yards of the objective without being detected by any sentry positions. Wrong, Kellerman's voice carried clearly across the assembly area. Your team was spotted and compromised during the initial movement phase. The mission was a complete failure. Maria felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Drill Sergeant, with respect, none of the designated sentries reported detecting our movement. Are you questioning my assessment, Santos? The question hung in the desert air like a challenge. Maria understood that her next words would determine the course of her remaining time in basic training. She could accept Kellerman's false evaluation and continue with the fiction that she had failed, or she could stand up for the truth and face whatever consequences followed. She thought about her grandfather's words, about character and determination. She thought about the soldiers who would serve under her leadership if she successfully completed training and earned a commission. Most importantly, she thought about the truth and what compromising it would cost her in the long term. I'm requesting clarification of the failure criteria, Drill Sergeant. Kellerman's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits as he processed Maria's request. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably in formation, sensing the electricity building between their drill sergeant and their fellow trainee. The desert sun seemed to intensify, casting harsh shadows across the training ground. Clarification. Kellerman's voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the assembly area. You want clarification on why your pathetic excuse for leadership resulted in mission failure. Yes, Drill Sergeant. Maria's voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The mission parameters specified reaching the objective without detection by designated sentries. We achieved that objective. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Other instructors had begun to notice the confrontation, moving closer to observe what was clearly becoming more than a routine training evaluation. Staff Sergeant Martinez, the senior instructor overseeing the exercise, approached the group with measured steps. Maria had observed Martinez during previous training sessions and found him to be fair but demanding, the kind of leader who pushed recruits to excel without crossing into personal vendetta. Is there a problem here, Drill Sergeant Kellerman? Martinez asked, his tone carefully neutral. No problem, Staff Sergeant. just correcting a recruit who doesn't understand the difference between partial success and complete mission failure. Martinez looked between Kellerman and Maria, clearly sensing undercurrents he hadn't been present to witness. What were the mission parameters for the infiltration exercise? Reach the designated objective without detection by sentry positions, Kellerman replied. Santos' team was spotted during initial movement and failed to achieve the objective. I observed the exercise from the tower, Martinez said slowly. I didn't see any detection reports from the sentry team. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Kellerman's jaw tightened as he realized his false evaluation had been contradicted by a senior instructor who outranked him. Perhaps there was confusion about the detection criteria, Martinez continued diplomatically. Let's review the exercise parameters with all team leaders to ensure clarity for future training. It was a face-saving offer, a way for Kellerman to back down without admitting he had lied about the results. But Maria could see in his expression that he viewed Martinez's intervention as a betrayal rather than a lifeline. Santos' team succeeded in reaching the objective undetected, Martinez announced to the assembled recruits. Well-executed infiltration with good adaptation to changing conditions. All teams performed acceptably, but Santos' team demonstrated superior tactical thinking and leadership. The praise felt hollow to Maria, earned through politics rather than pure merit. But she recognized that Martinez was trying to defuse a dangerous situation while maintaining proper training standards. All teams report to equipment maintenance, Martinez ordered. Exercise debrief will be conducted after evening chow. As the formation dissolved, Maria found herself walking alongside Johnson and Chen toward the equipment shed. Neither spoke until they were well away from the instructors, but their tension was palpable. That was messed up, Chen finally whispered. Kellerman straight up lied about us being detected. Keep your voice down, Johnson warned. This isn't over. He's going to make her pay for embarrassing him in front of Martinez. Maria said nothing, but she knew Johnson was right. The confrontation had escalated beyond training disagreement into personal conflict, and Kellerman now had additional motivation for retaliation. She had won the battle but potentially lost the war. The equipment maintenance period passed quietly, with recruits focusing on cleaning weapons and gear while shooting worried glances toward the instructor areas. Word of the confrontation had spread through the company, creating an atmosphere of nervous anticipation. During evening chow, Maria noticed that several recruits made a point of sitting near her, offering subtle shows of support. Others kept their distance, apparently afraid that association with her would draw Kellerman's attention to them. The divide troubled her more than Kellerman's hostility. She hadn't joined the army to create division among the people she hoped to serve alongside. Private Torres, a quiet recruit from New Mexico who rarely spoke during group conversations, surprised her by sliding his tray onto the table across from her. My sister went through Marine basic training 2 years ago, he said without preamble. She had an instructor like Kellerman. Guy made her life hell for 8 weeks trying to get her to quit. What happened? Maria asked. She graduated honor recruit, top of her class in everything. The instructor shook her hand at the ceremony and told her she was the toughest Marine he'd ever trained. Torres took a bite of his meal. Turned out he wasn't trying to break her down. He was trying to make her unbreakable. You think that's what Kellerman is doing? Torres shook his head. No, my sister said you can tell the difference. The ones who are trying to make you stronger push you toward success. The ones who just want to break you push you toward failure. Kellerman wants you to fail. The conversation stayed with Maria through the evening and into the night. As she lay on her bunk, she wondered if Torres was right about Kellerman's motivations. The distinction he described made sense. There was a fundamental difference between demanding excellence and sabotaging success. The next morning brought a new training focus, field operations and extended exercises. Kellerman announced that the company would spend the next 3 days in the field, practicing everything they had learned in a realistic environment that simulated actual combat conditions. Real soldiers don't get to sleep in climate-controlled barracks and eat hot meals 3 times a day, he told the assembled recruits. Real soldiers eat what they carry, sleep where they can, and stay alert for enemy contact 24 hours a day. The field exercise would test every skill they had developed: weapons handling, tactical movement, camouflage, communication, and leadership under stress. More importantly for Maria, it would place her in close proximity to Kellerman for 3 consecutive days with minimal oversight from other instructors. As the company loaded their gear and prepared to move to the exercise area, Staff Sergeant Martinez approached her with what appeared to be casual conversation. "How are you finding the training so far, Santos?" he asked. "Challenging but rewarding, Staff Sergeant. I'm learning a lot." "Good to hear. Field exercises can be particularly educational. Lot of opportunity to demonstrate leadership potential." His tone remained conversational, but Maria sensed deeper meaning in his words. Important to remember that real leaders maintain their composure regardless of external pressures. The advice felt like both guidance and warning. Martinez was telling her to be careful, to stay professional no matter what Kellerman might do during the extended exercise. "Understood, Staff Sergeant." "I'm sure you'll do fine. You've shown good judgment so far." Martinez paused. "Remember, successful completion of training requires meeting established standards, not exceeding them unnecessarily." Maria nodded her understanding. Martinez was advising her to avoid giving Kellerman any legitimate ammunition against her. Stay within regulations, perform to standard, and don't provide any real cause for disciplinary action. The company moved out in tactical formation, with recruits carrying full field packs weighing 60 pounds each. The exercise area lay 8 miles from the main base, accessible only by foot through rough desert terrain. The march itself constituted the first test of the exercise, an assessment of physical fitness, gear management, and team cohesion under stress. Maria settled into the rhythm of the march, adjusting her pace to match the company's movement. Her construction background had prepared her well for physical labor in hot conditions, and she found the march manageable despite the weight of her pack. Kellerman moved along the column of marching recruits, occasionally calling out corrections or encouragement. When he reached Maria's position, he fell into step beside her for several minutes without speaking. "Enjoying your nature hike, Santos?" he finally asked. "Yes, Drill Sergeant." "Wait until tonight. Temperature drops to 40 degrees out here. Amazing how cold 40 degrees feels when you're lying on the ground with nothing but a sleeping bag between you and the desert." Maria kept her eyes forward and maintained her marching pace. "I understand we'll be practicing field sleeping techniques, Drill Sergeant." "Oh, you'll be practicing all right. 3 days of sleeping on rocks, eating cold rations, and dealing with scorpions, snakes, and whatever else calls this wasteland home." Kellerman's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "City girls like you usually discover real quick that they're not as tough as they thought." "I'm from Phoenix, Drill Sergeant. I've camped in the desert before." The admission seemed to surprise Kellerman, though he recovered quickly. "Camping with Daddy and a cooler full of beer isn't the same as military field operations, Princess." He moved away from her position, but Maria caught a note of frustration in his departure. Each time she failed to react to his provocations, he seemed to grow more determined to find her breaking point. The company reached the exercise area in the early afternoon and immediately began establishing a defensive perimeter. Maria worked with her squad to dig fighting positions and establish fields of fire, following the procedures they had practiced on the base training ground. The exercise area consisted of several square miles of typical Sonoran desert rocky hills, dry washes, scattered scrub vegetation, and flat areas suitable for tactical movement. A series of permanent structures served as objectives for various training scenarios, while natural terrain features provided opportunities for camouflage and concealment exercises. As evening approached, Kellerman gathered the recruits for the first tactical scenario of the exercise. They would be conducting a night reconnaissance mission, with different squads assigned to gather intelligence on simulated enemy positions throughout the area. "Santos," Kellerman announced as he made squad assignments, "you're taking 2nd Squad on a reconnaissance of Hill 247. He pointed toward a rocky outcrop approximately 2 miles northeast of their position. "Your mission is to determine enemy strength and disposition without being detected. Move out at 2100 hours, return by 300. The mission was straightforward but challenging. Hill 247 rose several hundred feet above the surrounding desert and would require careful approach planning to avoid detection. Maria gathered her squad, Johnson, Chen, Williams, Rodriguez, and 2 other recruits, to study the terrain and plan their route. We'll approach from the southeast, she explained, sketching the plan in the dirt with a stick. The ground rises gradually on that side, giving us better concealment than a direct approach from the north. We'll establish an observation post about 500 meters out and use optics to gather intelligence on the objective. Chen studied the rough map. What about extraction? Same route or alternate? Alternate route along the western ridge. We don't want to risk compromise by using the same path twice. Maria looked around at her squad members. Questions? Williams raised his hand. What if we encounter actual enemy forces during the approach? Standard procedure: avoid contact unless fired upon. This is reconnaissance, not assault. Our mission is to gather information and return it to headquarters. The squad spent the remaining daylight hours preparing equipment and rehearsing hand signals for silent communication. As darkness fell across the desert, Maria felt the familiar anticipation that came before challenging missions. She had enjoyed similar feelings during college hiking trips, but the military context added layers of responsibility and consequence that made the experience both more meaningful and more stressful. At 2100 hours, 2nd Squad moved out from the company perimeter. The desert night was clear and cold, with a quarter moon providing enough light for navigation, but not enough to compromise concealment. Maria led the squad along their planned route, moving carefully through the rocky terrain while maintaining noise discipline. The approach to Hill 247 took nearly 2 hours, as they were forced to navigate around several obstacles and wait out the passage of other squads conducting their own missions. Maria was pleased with her team's performance. They moved quietly, maintained proper intervals, and communicated effectively through hand signals. They established their observation post in a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment and clear sight lines to the objective. Using night vision equipment, Maria began studying the hilltop for signs of enemy activity. What she saw surprised her. Instead of the simulated enemy positions she had expected, the hilltop appeared to be occupied by actual personnel instructors, based on their equipment and movement patterns. This wasn't part of the planned exercise scenario. She passed the observation equipment to Johnson for confirmation. What do you see up there? Johnson studied the hilltop for several minutes before responding. Looks like Kellerman and maybe 2 other instructors. They've got some kind of equipment set up, but I can't tell what it is from here. Maria took back the night vision device and conducted another detailed observation. Kellerman was clearly visible among the 3 figures on the hilltop, and they appeared to be setting up what looked like surveillance equipment pointed toward the company's base camp. The discovery presented a dilemma. Her mission was to gather intelligence and return to base, but the presence of instructors on the objective suggested this might be part of a larger training scenario she hadn't been briefed on. Alternatively, it might represent some kind of test or trap designed specifically for her squad. We're going to move closer, she decided after considering the options. If they're part of the exercise, we need better intelligence on what they're doing. If they're not, we need to know that too. The squad moved to within 200 meters of the hilltop, using a dry wash to conceal their approach. From their new position, Maria could see the instructor positions clearly and identify the equipment they were using. It was recording equipment, cameras, and listening devices pointed toward the company base camp. The instructors were conducting surveillance on the other training activities, monitoring the recruits' performance during the night exercise. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't random surveillance or general training oversight. The equipment was specifically positioned and oriented to monitor her squad's area of operations. Kellerman had somehow arranged to personally observe her mission performance, probably hoping to document failures he could use against her later. "Son of a bitch," Williams whispered when Maria shared her assessment with the squad. "He's got a personal surveillance operation running on us." "What do we do?" Chen asked. "Complete the mission as assigned or report what we found." Maria weighed the options carefully. Completing the reconnaissance mission as originally assigned would require her to gather intelligence on positions that didn't actually contain enemy forces. Reporting the instructor surveillance would reveal that she had discovered Kellerman's personal interest in her performance, potentially escalating their conflict to a new level. "We complete the mission," she decided. "We gather intelligence on what's actually here and report it accurately. Our job is to observe and report, not to interpret or make assumptions." The squad spent another hour conducting detailed observations, documenting the number of personnel, their equipment, and their activities. Maria maintained careful records of everything they observed, creating the kind of comprehensive intelligence report she would submit for any real-world reconnaissance mission. At 2:30 hours, they began their withdrawal along the planned alternate route. The return journey passed without incident, and they arrived at the company perimeter 15 minutes before their scheduled return time. Kellerman was waiting for them at the perimeter checkpoint, along with Staff Sergeant Martinez. The presence of both instructors suggested that Maria's report would receive immediate attention. "Squad leaders report," Martinez ordered as soon as they cleared the checkpoint. Maria delivered her report with military precision, detailing their approach route, observation methods, and intelligence findings. She described the personnel and equipment they had observed without speculation about their purpose or significance. 3 personnel, instructor type based on equipment and movement patterns, she concluded. Electronic equipment oriented toward grid coordinates 34.7589, minus 111.4512. Equipment type appeared consistent with surveillance or monitoring devices. Kellerman's expression remained carefully neutral throughout her report, but Maria caught a flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or concern, when she mentioned the specific grid coordinates of their base camp. "Any indication of mission or intent for the observed personnel?" Martinez asked. "No, Staff Sergeant. We maintained appropriate standoff distance and observed standard reconnaissance protocols." Martinez nodded approvingly. "Good work. Detailed, accurate reporting without speculation or assumption, exactly what we want to see from reconnaissance elements." He dismissed the squad to rest and prepare for the next day's training. As the other recruits headed toward their sleeping areas, Kellerman approached Maria. "Walk with me, Santos," he said in a tone that left no room for refusal. They walked to the edge of the company perimeter, away from the sleeping areas where other recruits might overhear their conversation. The desert night was utterly quiet except for the distant sound of night birds and the rustle of small animals moving through the brush. "That was a very thorough reconnaissance report," Kellerman began. "Very detailed observations about personnel and equipment." "Thank you, Drill Sergeant. I'm curious about something, though. How did you know to look for surveillance equipment? Most recruits would have assumed any personnel they observed were part of the standard enemy simulation." Maria considered her response carefully. This felt like another test, another opportunity for Kellerman to trap her in an admission that could be used against her. "Standard reconnaissance protocol is to observe and report what's actually present, not what we expect to find," she replied. "We observed electronic equipment and reported it as such." "Very professional," Kellerman said, but his tone suggested anything but approval. "Almost like you have previous experience with surveillance operations." "No, Drill Sergeant, just following the procedures we learned in training." Kellerman stopped walking and turned to face her directly. In the dim moonlight, his expression was difficult to read, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. "Let me be very clear about something, Santos. This training exercise is designed to test your abilities under realistic conditions. That includes your ability to focus on assigned missions rather than getting distracted by irrelevant details." The threat was barely veiled. Kellerman was warning her not to report or discuss what she had observed on Hill 247, despite the fact that she had followed proper reconnaissance procedures and given an accurate intelligence report. "I understand, Drill Sergeant." "Do you? Because I get the impression that you think you're playing some kind of game here. Like this is all just an elaborate test of your personal character rather than actual military training." Maria felt the familiar surge of anger that came with Kellerman's personal attacks, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm here to learn to be a soldier, Drill Sergeant." "No, you're here because the Army needed to fill recruitment quotas, and you happen to have the right demographics. The question is whether you're going to be a soldier or just another diversity statistic that washes out when the training gets real." The words hit harder than his previous insults because they struck at her deepest fears about her own motivations and qualifications. Maria had always wondered whether her acceptance into officer training programs was based on merit or demographics, and Kellerman's attacks fed directly into that uncertainty. "I'll prove myself through my performance," she said, echoing her response from their first confrontation. "Yes, you will, and I'll be watching every step of the way." Kellerman's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his loudest shouts. "Tomorrow we start advanced combat training, real scenarios with real consequences. No more playing around with basic marksmanship and tactical movement." He turned and walked back toward the instructor area, leaving Maria standing alone at the perimeter. Above her, the desert stars blazed in patterns her grandfather had taught her to recognize during camping trips when she was young. The familiarity of the constellations offered some comfort, reminding her that she had overcome challenges before and could do so again. But as she made her way back to her sleeping area, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that Kellerman's escalating hostility was building toward something more dangerous than verbal confrontations and unfair training evaluations. The surveillance equipment on Hill 247 suggested a level of personal investment in her failure that went far beyond normal instructor behavior. She settled into her sleeping bag and tried to rest, but sleep came slowly in the cold desert night. Around her, other recruits breathed deeply in the exhausted sleep of physical and mental fatigue, but Maria's mind remained active, planning and preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke across the desert with brutal efficiency, transforming the cold darkness into blazing heat within minutes. Maria woke to the sound of Kellerman's whistle cutting through the morning air like a blade, followed immediately by his voice booming across the camp. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauties. Today we separate the soldiers from the pretenders." The recruits scrambled from their sleeping bags, muscle-stiff and groggy from the cold night on hard ground. Maria rolled her sleeping bag with practiced efficiency, her camping experience serving her well as other recruits fumbled with unfamiliar equipment. "Formation in 5 minutes," Kellerman shouted. "Anyone not in position gets to start the day with extra physical training." The threat motivated even the groggiest recruits to rapid movement. Within 4 minutes, 48 soldiers stood in perfect formation on the rocky ground, breath steaming in the cold morning air. Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared from the instructor area carrying a steaming cup of coffee, his uniform somehow remaining perfectly pressed despite a night in the field. He surveyed the formation with approval before beginning the morning briefing. "Today begins advanced combat training," Martinez announced. "You'll be conducting live-fire exercises, close-quarters combat scenarios, and tactical problem-solving under stress. Performance standards are higher, margin for error is smaller, and consequences for failure are more serious." He gestured toward a series of structures visible in the distance, concrete buildings and obstacles that formed a realistic urban combat environment. "You'll be working in squad-sized elements throughout the day. Each scenario builds on previous training while introducing new challenges. Squad leaders will rotate to give everyone leadership experience under pressure." Maria felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Live-fire exercises represented the culmination of their weapons training, the point where classroom instruction became life-and-death reality. Even with safety protocols and instructor supervision, the presence of actual ammunition added weight to every decision and movement. "Santos," Kellerman's voice cut through her thoughts, "you'll be leading 3rd Squad through the first scenario, urban assault with live ammunition and simulated casualties." The assignment came as both honor and challenge. Leading the initial exercise meant maximum visibility for both success and failure, with every instructor and recruit observing her performance. Maria suspected Kellerman had chosen her deliberately. Hopping increased pressure would reveal weaknesses he could exploit. She gathered 3rd Squad, Chen, Rodriguez, Torres, Williams, and 3 other recruits whose capabilities she knew from previous training. They were solid performers individually, but they had limited experience working together as a cohesive unit. "Listen up," she addressed the squad as they prepared their equipment. "This is live fire, so safety protocols are absolute priority. Muzzle discipline, target identification, and communication are critical. Anyone uncertain about anything speaks up immediately." The squad members nodded their understanding, but Maria could see nervous tension in their expressions. Live ammunition changed everything, transforming training exercises from academic challenges into genuine tests of judgment and skill. "The scenario is building clearance with hostile forces present," she continued, reviewing their mission briefing. We advance through 3 structures, neutralizing threats while avoiding civilian casualties. Instructors will be positioned throughout the course as both hostiles and non-combatants. Rodriguez raised his hand. Rules of engagement. Standard military protocol, positive target identification required before engaging. When in doubt, don't shoot. Better to take extra time confirming targets than to engage friendlies or civilians. The squad spent 20 minutes reviewing hand signals, entry procedures, and coordination techniques. Maria insisted on multiple rehearsals of their movement patterns, knowing that stress and adrenaline would degrade performance unless the actions became automatic. As they prepared to move toward the exercise area, Torres approached her with obvious concern. "Something feels off about this setup," he said quietly. "Usually they start with simulated ammunition for the first live-fire exercises, then work up to actual rounds." Maria had noticed the same thing, but hoped Torres was wrong. Starting advanced combat training with live ammunition represented a significant escalation in risk and complexity. "Maybe they think we're ready for the full experience," she replied, though doubt crept into her voice. "Maybe, or maybe someone wants to see if you'll crack under real pressure." The observation echoed Maria's own suspicions about Kellerman's motivations. Each escalation in their conflict had increased the stakes, and live-fire training represented the highest-risk environment she had yet encountered. "We follow proper procedures regardless," she decided. "Safety first, mission second. If anyone feels unsafe or unsure, we stop and reassess." The squad moved toward the exercise area in tactical formation, weapons ready, but not loaded until they reached the starting position. The urban assault course consisted of 3 concrete buildings connected by open areas that required careful movement and coordination. Kellerman waited at the starting position with 2 other instructors, all wearing protective gear and carrying evaluation clipboards. The presence of multiple evaluators suggested this exercise carried significant weight in their overall training assessment. "Squad ready?" Kellerman asked as they reached the starting line. "Yes, drill sergeant," Maria replied, though she noticed he hadn't conducted the safety briefing she expected before live-fire exercises. "Load and make ready," Kellerman ordered. The squad inserted magazines into their weapons and chambered rounds with mechanical precision. The distinctive sound of bolts sliding forward seemed unnaturally loud in the desert morning, and Maria felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. "You have 15 minutes to clear all 3 buildings and reach the extraction point," Kellerman explained. "Hostile forces are present throughout the course. Civilian casualties will result in mission failure. Any safety violations will result in immediate exercise termination. Questions?" Maria raised her hand. "Are there specific areas we should avoid due to instructor positions or safety concerns?" "Negative. Treat the entire course as potentially hostile territory. Use proper clearing procedures and maintain tactical discipline." Kellerman's expression remained neutral, but Maria caught a glint in his eyes that suggested anticipation. "Ready to begin on my command," he continued. "Execute." Maria led her squad toward the first building, using available cover to approach the entry point. The structure was typical of urban combat training facilities, multiple rooms, various entry points, and complex sight lines that required careful coordination to clear safely. She positioned Chen and Rodriguez to cover the primary entry, while Williams and Torres moved to secure a secondary entrance. The remaining squad members took overwatch positions to provide supporting fire if needed. "Prepare to breach," Maria whispered into her communication device. The entry went smoothly, with both teams moving simultaneously through their assigned doorways. Maria followed the primary team into the building, her weapon ready and senses hyper-alert for any sign of hostile activity. The first room was empty, but movement in a connecting hallway indicated the presence of potential targets. Maria used hand signals to coordinate her team's movement toward the contact area, maintaining proper spacing and mutual support. As they approached the hallway intersection, a figure appeared around the corner. Maria's training kicked in automatically, assess the threat, identify the target, make the engagement decision. The figure wore civilian clothes but carried what appeared to be a weapon. "Contact front," she called out, raising her weapon to engage. The figure raised its hands and called out, "Don't shoot, civilian." Maria held her fire, keeping her weapon trained on the target while assessing the situation. The figure was clearly an instructor playing a civilian role, but the weapon-like object in his hands created ambiguity that required careful evaluation. "Drop what you're holding," she commanded. "Keep your hands visible." The instructor complied, dropping what revealed itself to be a cell phone rather than a weapon. Maria signaled her team to continue movement while keeping the civilian under observation until they could determine his status definitively. The building clearance continued through 6 more rooms, with the squad encountering 2 actual hostile targets and 3 additional civilians. Each engagement required split-second decisions about threat assessment and rules of engagement, but Maria's squad performed flawlessly. They exited the first building and began movement toward the second structure. The open ground between buildings required careful coordination to avoid exposure to potential sniper positions while maintaining forward momentum. As they approached the second building, Maria noticed something that made her pause. Kellerman was visible through a window on the second floor, positioned where he could observe their approach, but not necessarily where he belonged according to the exercise scenario. She made a tactical decision to alter their entry point, choosing a route that would avoid Kellerman's direct observation while still allowing proper building clearance. The change required quick coordination with her team, but they adapted smoothly to the modified plan. The second building proved more challenging, with multiple levels and a complex layout that required careful room-by-room clearing. Maria's squad encountered 4 hostile targets and managed each engagement according to proper rules of engagement. Halfway through the building clearance, they encountered an unexpected scenario. Torres, who was covering a stairwell, suddenly called out in genuine alarm. "Contact, real contact." Maria spun toward his position, expecting to see another training target. Instead, she saw Kellerman descending the stairs toward Torres with what appeared to be aggressive intent. This wasn't part of the scripted exercise scenario. "Drill Sergeant, are you playing a hostile role?" Maria called out, trying to understand the situation. Kellerman ignored her question, continuing his approach toward Torres with movements that seemed more personally motivated than professionally instructional. Torres maintained his weapon position, but clearly struggled with the conflict between training protocol and respect for authority. "Santos, control your soldier," Kellerman commanded. "He's pointing a weapon at a superior officer." The accusation was technically accurate, but ignored the context of the live-fire exercise, where recruits were expected to treat all personnel as potential threats, unless clearly identified as friendly. Maria found herself trapped between competing military protocols: support her subordinates' proper tactical behavior or defer to a superior officer's authority. "Torres is following proper clearing procedures, Drill Sergeant," she replied carefully. "Are you part of the exercise scenario?" "I'm part of whatever I decide to be part of, Santos. And right now I'm deciding that your squad has failed to maintain proper military courtesy." Maria realized that Kellerman was deliberately creating an impossible situation. Any response she made could be interpreted as either tactical failure or disrespect for authority, giving him justification for negative evaluation regardless of her choice. "Squad, weapons down," she ordered, deciding that de-escalation was the safest option. "Drill Sergeant, we're prepared to continue the exercise under your direction." Torres lowered his weapon reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the decision. Kellerman approached him directly, stopping close enough that their conversation would be private. "Soldier, did you just point a loaded weapon at a drill sergeant?" Kellerman asked, his voice carrying clearly through the concrete building. "I was following proper building clearance procedures, Drill Sergeant," Torres replied. "I identified movement and took appropriate defensive posture pending target identification." "Wrong answer," Kellerman's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You pointed a weapon at a superior officer because your squad leader failed to maintain control and discipline." Maria felt the situation spiraling beyond her ability to manage through normal channels. Kellerman was creating safety violations and training irregularities that could have serious consequences for her entire squad. "Drill Sergeant," she interjected, "I take full responsibility for any perceived deficiencies in my squad's performance. We're prepared to continue the exercise or accept corrective training as you determine appropriate. Kellerman turned his attention back to her, his expression suggesting satisfaction with her admission of responsibility. Oh, you'll accept corrective training all right. Both of you. Drop and give me 50 push-ups, right here, right now, with loaded weapons. The order violated every safety protocol they had learned about live-fire exercises. Performing physical exercise with loaded weapons created unnecessary risk of accidental discharge or negligent handling. Maria knew she should refuse the order, but she also knew that refusal would give Kellerman grounds for more serious disciplinary action. Drill Sergeant, safety protocols prohibit physical exercise with loaded weapons, she said carefully. Are you refusing to follow a direct order, Santos? The question was a trap, and Maria knew it. Refusing the order would result in charges of insubordination, but following it would violate fundamental safety regulations that could result in injury or death. Before she could respond, Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice echoed through the building. Exercise halt. All personnel unload weapons and report to the assembly area immediately. The intervention came at exactly the right moment, providing an external resolution to the impossible situation Kellerman had created. Maria felt a surge of relief as her squad safely cleared their weapons and began moving toward the exit. As they filed out of the building, Martinez approached her with obvious concern. Santos, what happened in there? We heard raised voices and saw deviation from the exercise timeline. Maria chose her words carefully, aware that her response would be evaluated by multiple instructors. We encountered some uncertainty about exercise parameters and threat identification, Staff Sergeant. The situation was resolved through proper chain of command consultation. Martinez nodded, but his expression suggested he understood more than her diplomatic response revealed. Copy that. Sometimes exercise scenarios create ambiguity that requires instructor intervention. The debrief that followed was tense and uncomfortable. Kellerman presented his evaluation of the squad's performance, focusing heavily on what he described as failures of military courtesy and proper respect for authority. He made no mention of his own deviation from established exercise protocols or the safety violations he had demanded. Other instructors asked detailed questions about specific tactical decisions and engagement procedures. Maria answered each query professionally, describing her squad's actions and rationale without directly challenging Kellerman's contradictory evaluation. When the formal debrief concluded, Martinez dismissed the recruits for equipment maintenance and rest period. As the group dispersed, he approached Maria for what appeared to be casual conversation. How are you finding the advanced training? He asked. Challenging but educational, Staff Sergeant. Every exercise teaches us something new about working under pressure. That's the goal. Important to remember that training scenarios sometimes include unexpected elements designed to test adaptability and judgment. Martinez paused meaningfully. Sometimes the most important test is knowing when to seek clarification rather than making assumptions about unclear situations. Maria understood the guidance. Martinez was advising her to involve higher authority when Kellerman created ambiguous or potentially dangerous situations, rather than trying to handle everything at the squad level. Thank you for the guidance, Staff Sergeant. I'll remember that for future exercises. Good. Also important to remember that all training activities should follow established safety protocols. Any deviation from those protocols should be immediately reported through proper channels. The statement was both instruction and warning. Martinez was telling her that Kellerman's demand for physical exercise with loaded weapons had been improper, and that similar violations should be reported rather than endured. That evening, as the company prepared for the second night in the field, Maria reflected on the day's events with growing concern. Kellerman's behavior was escalating beyond personal animosity into actions that created genuine safety risks for her and her squad. The confrontation in the building had crossed lines that seemed more personal than professional. Torres approached her during the evening equipment maintenance period, speaking quietly to avoid attracting attention from other recruits or instructors. That wasn't right what happened in there, he said. Kellerman was way out of line with that weapons thing. I know, Maria replied, but we handled it properly. No one got hurt and we followed appropriate procedures. This time, what about next time? He's escalating this thing, and eventually someone's going to get seriously injured if he keeps pushing boundaries. The observation matched Maria's own concerns. Each confrontation with Kellerman had involved higher stakes and greater risks, suggesting a pattern that might culminate in genuinely dangerous situations. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "Talk to Martinez, or someone higher up the chain. This isn't normal drill sergeant behavior, and it's not going to stop on its own." Maria considered the advice carefully. Reporting Kellerman would require her to make specific allegations against a superior officer, allegations that would be difficult to prove and might result in retaliation against her entire squad. But allowing the pattern to continue might result in injuries or worse. "I'll think about it," she promised Tors. "For now, we focus on completing training and staying safe." As the second night in the field settled over the desert, Maria lay in her sleeping bag weighing her options. The stars overhead provided the same sense of continuity and perspective they had offered the night before, but her situation felt increasingly precarious. Tomorrow would bring the final day of field exercises and the culmination of their advanced combat training. Whatever Kellerman was planning, she sensed it would happen soon. The escalating pattern of confrontation suggested he was building towards some kind of climactic test that would either break her or provide him with definitive justification for her removal from training. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the sounds of the desert night and the weight of decisions that would need to be made in the morning. Around her, other recruits slept the exhausted sleep of physical and mental fatigue, unaware of the personal war being fought within their ranks. When morning came, it would bring the final confrontation that had been building since her first day on the training ground. Maria had proven herself capable of meeting every military standard and overcoming every tactical challenge, but she had not yet faced the ultimate test of her character and determination. That test was coming with the desert dawn, and she would face it alone. The third morning in the field arrived with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down from the cloudless sky like a weight. Maria woke before the official reveille, her internal clock disrupted by stress and anticipation of whatever final challenge awaited. Around her, exhausted recruits slept deeply despite the uncomfortable conditions, their bodies pushed beyond normal limits by 3 days of intensive training. She used the quiet time to review her equipment and mentally prepare for what she sensed would be the climactic test of Kellerman's campaign against her. Every confrontation had built toward something larger, and the pattern suggested today would bring whatever resolution he had been planning. The shrill blast of Kellerman's whistle shattered the pre-dawn quiet with unusual intensity. "Final formation, move it, move it, move it." The recruits scrambled from their sleeping positions with practiced efficiency born of 3 days under Kellerman's demanding supervision. Maria noticed that several instructors had appeared overnight, including some she didn't recognize from their regular training cadre. Staff Sergeant Martinez stood at the front of the formation with unusual formality, his expression more serious than she had seen during their entire field exercise. Behind him, Kellerman waited with barely contained energy, like a predator preparing to spring. "Today concludes your field training with a comprehensive practical exercise," Martinez announced. "Individual performance under extreme stress, testing everything you've learned over the past 3 days. Each recruit will face a unique scenario designed to challenge your specific weaknesses and strengths." Maria felt her stomach tighten. Individual testing meant isolation from her squad, removing the mutual support that had helped her navigate previous challenges. Whatever Kellerman had planned, she would face it alone. "Santos," Martinez called out, "you're first up. Report to Drill Sergeant Kellerman for scenario briefing." The selection surprised no one, least of all Maria. Being chosen first for the final exercise was either recognition of her leadership performance or preparation for public humiliation. Given Kellerman's consistent hostility, she suspected the latter. She approached Kellerman's position with military bearing, despite the anxiety churning in her chest. Other recruits watched with obvious concern, understanding that her performance would likely foreshadow their own experiences. "Follow me, Santos," Kellerman ordered without preamble. He led her away from the main camp toward a section of the training area she hadn't seen before. The terrain here was more rugged, with deeper ravines and larger rock formations that would complicate movement and visibility. A series of structures had been erected overnight, temporary buildings that suggested a complex scenario requiring multiple skills. Your final test, Kellerman began when they reached an observation point overlooking the exercise area, will simulate a real-world combat situation. Hostage rescue with limited intelligence, time pressure, and multiple complications. Maria studied the terrain below, noting the building layouts and possible approach routes. The scenario looked realistic and challenging, but within the scope of their training. She wondered what hidden complications Kellerman had planned. Mission parameters, Kellerman continued, are as follows. 3 hostages held in the central building by unknown number of hostile forces. Your mission is to conduct reconnaissance, develop a tactical plan, execute the rescue, and evacuate all personnel to the extraction point within 45 minutes. The timeline was aggressive but manageable for a properly planned operation. Maria began mental calculations of movement times and tactical requirements while Kellerman outlined additional details. You'll be working alone for the initial reconnaissance phase, he added with obvious satisfaction. No squad support, no backup, no safety net. Just you, your training, and whatever tactical skills you actually possess. The isolation element explained his enthusiasm. Previous exercises had allowed her to rely on squad members for support and coordination. This scenario would test her individual capabilities without the buffering effect of teamwork. Equipment will be basic load only, Kellerman continued. Standard weapon, limited ammunition, basic communication gear. No special equipment, no technological advantages. Real soldiers make do with what they have. Maria nodded her understanding while continuing to study the exercise area. The buildings appeared to be constructed from shipping containers and prefabricated modules, creating a realistic urban environment suitable for close-quarters combat training. Questions, Kellerman asked. Rules of engagement for this scenario. Standard military protocol. Protect the hostages, neutralize verified threats, avoid civilian casualties. Same rules you'd follow in actual combat. The answer seemed straightforward, but Maria sensed hidden complexity in the scenario design. Kellerman's satisfaction suggested complications that weren't apparent from his briefing. Safety protocols. All standard safety measures are in place. Range safety officers will monitor the exercise, and medical personnel are standing by. However, his voice took on a harder edge, safety protocols won't save you from mission failure or tactical incompetence. Maria understood the threat. This exercise would be conducted under actual combat conditions with real consequences for mistakes. Safety measures would prevent death or serious injury, but they wouldn't protect her from failure that could end her military career. Time starts now, Kellerman announced, checking his stopwatch. 45 minutes to complete the mission. Equipment issue point is at the base of the hill. Move out. Maria began her descent toward the equipment point, her mind already working through tactical options and contingency plans. The 45-minute timeline required efficient movement and decisive action, leaving little room for extended reconnaissance or elaborate planning. At the equipment point, she drew her basic combat load rifle, ammunition, communication device, and minimal field gear. The equipment was standard issue, familiar from months of training, but she took extra time ensuring everything was properly secured and functional. Her communication device crackled to life as she completed equipment check. Santos, this is Control, radio check. Control, Santos, Lima Charlie. The radio procedure felt automatic after weeks of practice. Roger, Santos, you are cleared to begin reconnaissance phase. Report initial observations when ready. Maria began her movement toward the exercise area, using available cover to approach the central building complex. The terrain offered good concealment opportunities, but the open areas between cover positions would require careful timing to traverse safely. As she moved closer to the objective, she began to notice details that hadn't been visible from the observation point. The buildings showed signs of recent activity: open doors, scattered equipment, and movement indicators that suggested the presence of role players inside. From a concealed position 200 meters from the central building, she began detailed surveillance of the target area. Through her rifle scope, she could see figures moving inside the building. Some appeared to be hostages based on their restricted movement. while others moved with the freedom and alertness of captors. Control, Santos. Initial observation complete. Confirming 3 potential hostages in central building, unknown number of hostile forces. Request permission to move to closer observation position. Santos, Control. Permission granted. Use caution and maintain communication. Maria began her approach to a secondary observation position that would provide better intelligence on the interior situation. The movement required crossing 50 meters of open ground, but she identified a route that used natural terrain features for concealment. Halfway across the open area, something felt wrong. The exercise had been too straightforward, too much like standard training scenarios. Maria's instincts, sharpened by weeks of dealing with Kellerman's unpredictable behavior, warned her that complications were coming. She reached her secondary position without incident and resumed surveillance of the objective. From her new vantage point, she could see more clearly into the building interior, where the situation appeared more complex than the initial briefing had suggested. Instead of 3 hostages, she counted at least 5 people who appeared to be captives, including what looked like children based on their size and movements. The number of potential hostiles was also higher than expected, with at least 4 armed figures visible through various windows. Control, Santos. Revised intelligence. 5 potential hostages, including possible juveniles, minimum 4 hostile forces confirmed. Mission parameters may require adjustment. The response came not from the anonymous control voice, but from Kellerman himself. Santos, Kellerman, mission parameters remain unchanged. Execute as briefed. The order troubled Maria because it ignored the new intelligence she had gathered. Military doctrine emphasized adapting plans based on changing conditions and updated information. Kellerman's insistence on following the original parameters, despite contradictory evidence, violated basic tactical principles. Kellerman, Santos. Current situation differs significantly from briefing parameters. Request guidance on revised approach. Santos, execute the mission as originally briefed. 45-minute timeline is unchanged. Adapt and overcome or accept mission failure. Maria recognized the impossible position Kellerman was creating. He was ordering her to execute a plan based on incomplete information while ignoring intelligence that would normally trigger tactical adjustments. Any failure that resulted could be attributed to her tactical incompetence rather than flawed planning or unrealistic parameters. She made the decision to proceed based on current intelligence rather than outdated briefing information. Real combat operations required commanders to adapt to changing conditions, and she would demonstrate that adaptability regardless of Kellerman's preferences. Control, Santos. Beginning approach to objective based on current tactical situation. Maria spent 5 precious minutes developing a modified plan that accounted for the additional hostages and increased hostile forces. The timeline pressure forced her to accept higher risks than ideal, but the alternative was certain failure through adherence to a plan that no longer matched reality. Her approach to the building required movement through increasingly dangerous terrain as she closed distance with the objective. The hostile forces inside were alert and organized, suggesting a level of training that exceeded typical exercise parameters. At 50 meters from the building, Maria encountered her first real surprise. One of the supposed hostile forces was clearly identifiable as Kellerman, positioned in a window where he could observe her approach while playing a combat role in the scenario. The discovery confirmed her suspicions about the exercise design. Kellerman had inserted himself into the scenario not as an observer or safety monitor, but as an active participant with direct influence on her performance evaluation. She adjusted her approach route to avoid his direct observation while maintaining tactical momentum toward the objective. The adjustment cost valuable time, but prevented Kellerman from anticipating her movements or interfering with her tactical decisions. The building assault required careful coordination between movement, reconnaissance, and tactical action. Maria used techniques learned during urban combat training to approach the building systematically, gathering intelligence on internal layout and hostile positions. Through a ground-level window, she observed the hostage situation in detail. 5 people were restrained in a central room, guarded by armed figures who moved with military precision. The scenario had been designed to require complex tactical problem-solving rather than simple assault techniques. Maria keyed her radio for a final situation report before beginning the assault phase. Control, Santos. Prepared to execute building clearance. 5 hostages confirmed, multiple hostile forces in defensive positions.